Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into the architecture of ethics and prejudice. We're going to look at how these massive systems all around us are silently shaping our minds, and honestly, more importantly, how we can consciously shape our own minds to stay strong, precise, and fair. Let's explore exactly how these ethical structures are built from the ground up, how they inevitably kind of erode over time, and the deep, deep mental disciplines we need to maintain them in what is, let's face it, a pretty chaotic world right now.
Okay, let's dive into this. Consider this really intense declaration. I am not evil, and I do not do evil, because I do not believe in evil. Now, what does it actually mean to live by a phrase like that today? Like, in our incredibly complex world, is that just hopelessly naive? Or is it actually this profound, radical declaration of personal agency? We live in an era where massive technological and societal forces are constantly trying to dictate our moral boundaries for us. So today, we are unpacking exactly what it takes to live entirely beyond the concept of evil. We'll trace this through the tech we build, the society we navigate every single day, and finally, deep down within ourselves. So here's our roadmap for today. We're taking a macro to micro journey. We'll start way up high at the systemic levels with the erosion of ethics and AI and toxic cultures. Then we'll move into the architecture of injustice before really narrowing it down to the deeply personal stuff, how we unlearn prejudice, and finally, the discipline of precision. Let's get into it. Section 1, the erosion of ethics. How a simple phrase became a moral compass.
All right, let's go back to the early 2000s. Google engineers Paul Buchheit and Amit Patel introduced three little words that would literally come to define a whole generation of tech culture: don't be evil. Now, you have to understand, this wasn't just some boring corporate legalese. It was meant to be a real cultural compass. During the wild, rapid expansion of the early internet boom, Buchheit wanted this ethical anchor embedded so deeply into the company's DNA that you basically couldn't remove it. It was this incredibly practical heuristic to avoid short-term exploitation. If an engineer was faced with a tough choice, they could just pause and ask, hey, would the world be tangibly worse if I did this? And by 2004, this audacious promise was actually written right into their official IPO prospectus. But watch what happens when an institution scales up massively. Skip to 2015. The new parent company, Alphabet, adopts a much safer, kind of diluted phrase, do the right thing. And then finally, in 2018, don't be evil is quietly removed entirely from the preface of Google's code of conduct. And this brilliantly illustrates a really profound universal warning. You see, the quiet disappearance of that famous motto isn't just some interesting footnote about a tech giant. It shows us that institutions, and individuals too, inevitably lose their moral clarity if they don't actively, aggressively maintain it. Think of the daily, grinding friction of hitting quarterly profits, managing this vast global scale, and satisfying endless stakeholder demands. It acts like a massive ocean current. It slowly, almost imperceptibly, chips away at our foundational values until they just detach. Ethical anchors require constant, deliberate tending, or they simply drift away in the current of convenience. Section 2, AI and toxic cultures. The modern ethical landscape. The famous historian of technology, Melvin Kranzberg, had this great observation. He said technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. Basically, technology is an amplifier of human intent. And wow, do we see this vividly right now with artificial intelligence? AI, when it has rigorous human oversight, has the unbelievable power to amplify our creativity, accelerate curing diseases, and democratize global knowledge. But AI without that critical oversight, it rapidly spreads disinformation, enables mass surveillance, and automates harm on a scale we previously couldn't even imagine. Think about algorithmic bias in modern hiring or lending systems, right? A machine might quietly reject thousands of perfectly qualified applicants based on deeply flawed historical data. So the true danger here isn't some malevolent sci-fi supercomputer. No, the true danger is us. It's human beings willingly outsourcing our own moral judgment and personal responsibility to a completely passive, unfeeling algorithm. And when we outsource that judgment, we pave the way for digital landscapes that normalize harm at an entirely unprecedented scale. These digital environments create the absolute perfect, unmonitored breeding ground for narcissistic behavior to just flourish. Why? Because empathy is slowly replaced by pure performance. And in these highly toxic digital systems, a really fascinating and frankly terrifying psychological dynamic happens. Exploitation slowly becomes systemic. Furthermore, the people who actually notice the harm, the whistleblowers, the truth tellers, they disrupt the smooth functioning of that toxic system. So what does the system do? It protects itself. It punishes them, entirely reframing the person who points out the problem as the problem itself. It's wild. So how on earth do we navigate this digital minefield? Well, the answer is incredibly ancient:
The golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Sounds simple, right? But applying the golden rule today is notoriously difficult. We are constantly fighting these algorithms that are meticulously designed to reward outrage and engagement way over nuance and truth. Plus, the sheer relentless speed of the internet completely outpaces our human capacity for ethical reflection. It demands an instant reaction from us before we can even process what we're actually seeing. Add to that the fact that anonymity heavily dissolves our sense of personal accountability. When you put the whole shebang together, the massive scale of these platforms takes what used to be isolated individual bad choices and magnifies them into sweeping systemic harm.
Section 3. The Architecture of Injustice. How Systems Condition Human Behavior.
Systemic prejudice is highly misunderstood. It is not simply an individual moral defect or like some sudden surge of malice. Modern research consistently shows us that it's a deeply learned social, psychological, and structural pattern. Society rarely just spontaneously generates malicious people out of thin air, right? Instead, it subtly conditions them over an entire lifetime. A culture might reward conformity to harmful norms with social inclusion, while subtly punishing empathy toward marginalized groups by ostracizing people. Over decades, this normalizes dehumanization to the point where it becomes entirely invisible to the majority. The key takeaway here is that people are not born holding prejudice. They absorb it, literally like oxygen, from the structural systems built around them.
So the crucial point is this profound paradox highlighted by modern sociological research. Prejudice isn't just about what someone feels in their heart. It's about measurable, real-world outcomes. To put that into perspective, extensive data shows that Black applicants are historically twice as likely to be denied a mortgage compared to white applicants who have identical financial profiles. We see similar, deeply ingrained structural inequalities leading to significantly higher maternal mortality rates for Black women in the healthcare system. The chilling reality here is that these massive systems produce wildly unequal outcomes regardless of whether the individual loan officers or doctors operating inside them genuinely believe they are being fair. The system itself has learned the bias, and it executes that bias perfectly without anyone ever needing to consciously choose it.
Section 4. How we unlearn prejudice. Rewiring perception, emotion, and behavior.
But here is where our narrative shifts to something deeply hopeful. If society can condition prejudice into us, then as individuals with agency, we absolutely possess the power to unlearn it. And the process of debiasing follows a distinct, scientifically backed path. Let's look at these 8 steps. It begins entirely internally, with the sheer awareness of bias, because, well, you simply cannot change what you refuse to see. From there, it moves into active perspective taking, and then outward into positive intergroup contact. It requires replacing tired stereotypes with actual objective data. Finally, it demands rigorous behavioral practice to literally rewire your neural pathways, emotional regulation so you don't instantly become defensive when challenged, and expansion of your identity to broaden your sense of us, and a long-term commitment. Notice that unlearning prejudice isn't about wallowing in guilt or shame. It's about the hard, disciplined work of building entirely new mental and behavioral patterns over a lifetime.
Let's talk about perspective taking. Think of it as your internal empathy engine. Neuroscientific research actually proves that actively imagining the world from another group's viewpoint reduces prejudice far more effectively than just sitting down and reading dry facts about them. But, this involves real psychological friction. It means genuinely asking yourself, what would this scenario actually feel like if it were happening to me? When you actively listen to lived experiences or engage with stories that center marginalized voices, you aren't just absorbing new info. You are leveraging your brain's neuroplasticity to literally rewire your emotional responses, breaking down those artificial walls between us and them. And this leads directly into what psychology calls all ports contact hypothesis. Basically, meaningful interaction with people from other groups is the strongest known antidote to bias, positive intergroup contact. However, the nuance here is absolutely critical. Just casually interacting isn't enough to disrupt deep-seated prejudice. It requires highly specific conditions. You need equal status and shared goals. For example, a boss and a subordinate interacting doesn't disrupt bias in the same way that 2 peers working shoulder to shoulder on a shared high-stakes project does. When we cooperate toward a mutual goal with institutional support, the bias dissolves. This is exactly why genuine equal friendships across different groups are the most powerful prejudice disruptors known to science. It's truly a game changer.
Section 5. The discipline of precision. Staying free of prejudice while staying strong. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how precision completely flips our usual understanding of strength. You don't stay free of prejudice by being overly gentle, soft, or naive. You do it by being sharply, undeniably disciplined. See, the human brain naturally prefers generalization, lumping people into broad categories, because, let's be honest, it's easy and it saves mental calories. But this generalization is simply mental laziness, and it drastically clouds your judgment. Precision, on the other hand, is the ultimate mental strength. It is the rigorous, daily discipline of evaluating and judging individuals solely by their distinct individual actions. You separate the person from the group. By refusing to generalize, you retain absolute clarity.
And that exact precision applies directly to how we defend ourselves in a harsh world. Consider the stark contrast between bitterness and boundaries. Bitterness is a generalization. It tells you everyone like you is dangerous. Bitterness is essentially a poison you drink while hoping the other person dies. It completely corrupts your entire worldview. Boundaries, however, are precise. A boundary is a tactical shield. It says, I won't let you, specifically, harm me again. Boundaries effectively isolate the harm to the exact person who caused it. They keep you incredibly safe and guarded, without poisoning your overall perspective on humanity as a whole.
Implementing this requires mastering the incredibly difficult gap between a stimulus and your response. When someone harms you, the automatic biological reaction is immediate pain and a desire for retaliation, right? We've all been there. But the disciplined mind forces a pause. In that pause, you have to find the immense internal strength to ask, what action aligns with my own ethical code? You have to tell yourself, I respond from who I am, not from what they just did to me. You boldly name the harm, but you refuse to dehumanize the person. You stay incredibly powerful precisely because you are consciously choosing your response rather than simply reacting to their cruelty.
And this brings us to the ultimate summit of ethical agency. Like a climber reaching the peak, you realize that you stay powerful by staying clean. Let's return to that opening thought. To declare, I do not believe in evil, is a profound refusal to be its unconscious instrument. It requires rigorous, fiercely independent thinking in a world that constantly begs you to conform. It requires you to stay endlessly curious about what shapes other people, because true curiosity dissolves prejudice on contact. You do not become what hurt you. You remain the rare kind of person who can walk straight through the darkness, fully aware of it, without ever absorbing it into yourself. So, as you step away from this explainer and back into the relentless friction of the real world, how will you govern your own mind? Will you choose the mental laziness of prejudice, letting massive systems and opaque algorithms silently dictate your beliefs? Or will you actively pick up the weapon of precision, taking full, uncompromising ownership of your ethical agency? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.